So I'm David Miller. I'm the Chief Maintenance Engineer for the state of Louisiana. I've been with WATD for about 30 years, been about 20 years on the design side, and the next 10 years bouncing around maintenance and operations, and was formerly the bridge maintenance engineer until last year. And when I moved up, I was fortunate to keep the bridge part of what I do, so I'm staying involved on the bridge side. We have our emergency response is set up into emergency support functions, and the two main ones that we have to deal with at the Department of Transportation is the ESF1, which is transportation. Actually, it's busing people around. I don't know how we got involved in that because we don't own a bus, but we do it. And then where we really fall in here is in the public works engineering side. And that's just a little detail. But so we have a pretty good structured setup. When there's an emergency, we have a emergency operations center that gets set up in headquarters, and we run everything out of headquarters and have the daily, depending on how bad the event is, you have maybe 2, sometimes 3 meetings with the districts that are affected. But one of the big things in here is flood control, the debris removal. We do debris contracts. We preset those up. It's a good way to get rid of that stuff on your bridges. You can also do it with in-house personnel, but we have debris contracts that we use, mostly for hurricanes, because you get a lot more debris. But we had a lot of debris in the August event from flooded homes. So we had 2. We didn't have 5. We had 2 in 2016. One was March, and roughly 26 inches of rain fell, and I think this was maybe 3 or 4 day time frame. And the biggest effect that this had on anything was the Sabine River crested nearly about 6 feet above, and that's the river that borders Texas and Louisiana, and most of the rain occurred in the north part of the state, and water flows downhill, and it ended up in the south part of the state. This is up near Monroe. It was one of the smaller bridges we lost that actually our statewide bridge crew came in and replaced. And like with Graham, I mean, our biggest challenge was fast-moving waters and washouts. We had a lot of culverts that we lost, and bridge abutments. Behind the bridge abutments, we didn't lose but a couple of bridges in the deal, but we had many that had the approach slabs behind the abutments washed out. And, trying to do a stream bed profile with water moving that fast is it's not going to happen. So you're sending folks out there. Is the bridge still standing? Okay. Is it shaking a lot? Well, we're probably good to go. We had, when you look at the scour critical bridges that we had in those areas, we had like 1,500 bridges that were scour critical that had to be looked at, and looked at multiple times, because you look at them once when the event's going on, and you got to get out there quickly after the water goes down to do a real good evaluation. And this was, let's see, the photo on the left is on the Texas side, and that is what happened when the Sabine flooded. The photo on the right is the Louisiana side. That's I-10. If any of you have ever been down in that area, this is right on the border, and it was, like I said, it's sort of an unprecedented event that happened. And we collaborated a good bit with Texas when the water did make it down there. Yeah, we had debris as well. It's a lot. I think you could walk on that probably. In this particular event, we did most of the debris removal with our in-house crews, but we do have contracts set up. This was I-20, just probably east of Shreveport. And as Graham said, you look at that and you go, the water's right. When do you make the call to shut down the interstate? That's never a good call. And we eventually did shut it down because it got to be too high. It actually did eventually overtop this bridge. We never lost it, but we did overtop it. And I think with this event, we had 3 interstate systems shut down. So that was the fun starting in March, and then we were still recuperating as Graham and Texas were from their stuff, and when the August flood event hit. And this dumped about 33 inches of rain in 2.5 days. I just didn't think it was going to stop ever. And we had almost 150,000 homes that were flooded in the Baton Rouge area. There's a lot of other statistics in there, but that's a pretty big one. That's actually more homes that flooded than from Katrina. And it just didn't move. And the other thing too with the weather predictions, hurricanes are a little more predictable and that they know where they're going to come. They don't know always how fast and all that stuff. These kind of events, we had very little warning. You know, it started raining a Thursday night, and they're like, well, you know, you might get this. And not a single one predicted 33 inches of rain in 2.5 days. So you kind of start to deal with it as you go. A lot of children displaced out of schools. This was a little area just to the east of Baton Rouge. Some of the major schools are still not reopened, and it'll probably be another 6 months to a year. This is just outside of Baton Rouge, and these places had never flooded before, ever. This is Interstate 12 in Denham Springs, which is just outside of Baton Rouge. At one point, we had almost 400 roads closed, and it got to be easier just to say what was open in our area. There's some other statistics there on the damage. $6 million in debris alone. Most of that was homes that were gutted out and put on the side of the road. This is, of course, our on-system Louisiana and state highways, not the off-system stuff. So, you know, we had 400 roads closed. It would be easy to say that there were probably over 1,000 roads that were closed in the just a little small part of our state. So that was kind of like everything that was closed at one point. And is there a pointer? This is the Baton Rouge area. So it had a lot of stuff shut down. 120 bridges damaged, 17 were closed, and I quit counting, but there were about 4,900 bridge inspections, all on scour critical bridges that had to be looked at multiple times. The way we accomplished that was we were fortunate. We have 9 districts, 3 were affected, so we were able to mobilize bridge inspectors from the unaffected district into our area to help out, because we also had a lot of our own employees that were flooded. So here's a before with Denham Springs. That's what it looked like after. This is Port Vincent, really hard hit area before and after. This is one of the ramps on I-12. Looks like a lake. I don't know what you do with that, but you know, our water table is high in Louisiana, and one of the outcomes from the flood was that coffins were kicked up and moved around, and they don't have labels on them once they move around. You know, the headstone stays where it was, and so figuring out what goes where, I don't envy the people that had to do that. So that was unusual. It's one of our Louisiana highways that had the most damage. One of the interesting things that we got involved in, and I had never been involved in this, and every event is different. One of our hospitals was in danger of flooding. It looks like it's flooded there, but it's not. So we were already in the process of ordering some what they call Aqua dams. They're large tubes that you fill with water, and we were going to line them along our interstate I-10 that was flooded and de-water it and reopen the routes between Baton Rouge and New Orleans. Every major route that went southeast to New Orleans was flooded. So we had ordered some and had them in weigh-in in the meantime, this issue arose with the women's hospital, and so we ended up loaning them to the hospital to, basically they put them all the way around the hospital, filled them up. These things are like 4 or 5 foot high and about 12 foot wide. It takes about an hour to fill 100 feet. Kind of see, looks like a big old black snake going all the way around. Fortunately, we didn't really need them there. The flood never came close enough, but we did deploy about 1,000 feet of it. Picking them up is an absolute pain in the neck. You got to have a lot of people, and it's, unless you cut them, then you're blowing a lot of money. So we finally got them to where we had intended them using them. We were going to use them on I-10, and the area that we wanted to use it on was too deep and too long, so we concentrated on, this says US 190, but it's actually US 61, and we deployed them there. I think I lost several years on this because talk about not being in the field. I was in the field on this one until about, I don't know, 2:30, 3 o'clock in the morning. And so you can see in the picture on the right, we got them set up, and then you set up pumps and you pumped it out. We just pumped out what was down in the middle and got it reopened by the next morning. This is a typical repair that was done. In some cases, when we lost the approach slab, we deemed it was better just to add another span, which is what we're doing here. This is actually our statewide crew that works for Nick. The other thing we use, these are slightly smaller. They're called Tiger Dams. There was another area of I-10 that we deployed these. Word of caution, if you use these, they roll when they're filled with water, so you've got to have something on the backside or find a way to stake them down, because it's really depressing to get them filled up and then watch them roll in the water. They don't work. So, but one of the interesting things in watching human reaction to what was going on was this thing dubbed the Cajun Navy, and it's probably would happen in any state where there was flooding, that folks with boats just come out and start rescuing people. It's pretty amazing to watch. These guys got dubbed the Cajun Navy. So I saw it going on in North Carolina as well when y'all had rivers flood. I don't think it was the Cajun Navy, but maybe it was. We'll have to meet and talk about that later over a beer. So one more, this is not too exciting of a picture, but it's one I took with helping, when you weren't working, when you finally got a break, you were helping somebody else. This was one of the people that works for me. She flooded. We had, most of the flooding occurred, like I said, in a 3-district area, which probably made up about 1,500 employees. Out of those 1,500 employees, we had 400 that flooded. So the folks that would normally be responding couldn't help. They were flooded themselves, just trying to survive. And so Tammy, who works for me, she was in one of the areas that stayed flooded for almost 5 weeks. So when we finally could get in there and help her, we did. This is one of my last pictures. It might be flooding, but you still got to have beer, right? So they're looking for it. I don't know if they're with the Cajun Navy or not, but one of this picture on the right is a military vehicle, and y'all know how tall those things are. We lost a few of those in the event that could tell you some pretty amazing stories. I had one employee that almost died twice. The water came up so quick. Not as fast as what it did on yours, but close enough. And they looked out in their yard, 4 o'clock in the morning. He was one of my bridge inspectors. He was supposed to go. We knew flooding was coming. We didn't know how much. He had taken the state car home, state truck home. 20 minutes later, he's got 4 feet of water in his front yard. And they're just scrambling to try and get out. And they almost didn't make it. But we'll be fine. I think a lot of us felt like that. They're never fun, but we always learn from them. I think you do have to watch your folks. you really got to watch them because the state employees are some of the best in the world, and they will go and go and go until they can't go anymore. You do. I know you brought up that you got to send them home, and we learned that from several hurricanes ago, and we have shift work. We have preset shifts, both headquarters and the districts. Some do it 12 to 12, day to night. Some do it split the day a little differently, but I won't care if I don't ever see a flood like that again. So the question was, did we have more problems on newer bridges versus older bridges? With newer bridges obviously built with better standards, newer standards? I would say no. There was no discrimination. The water, when you get water cresting at 4, 5, 6 feet above the previous all-time record, what it does is, Graham said it exactly, it tries to go, it comes up underneath the bridge. We did have some scour, but most of the damage we had was it going through the abutments, and they just weren't armored enough. And so we've done a lot of retrofits. I think, lessons learned would be, you just have to have a lot heavier rock to protect in those kind of situations. But we had stuff that was 3 years old that washed out just as quickly as some of the older stuff.
We did a lot of that too. Just found that ad spans.
Ad spans, yeah. Well, it's already eaten out. I mean, we had when you've lost another 20, 30 feet behind your bridge, you got to add a span or two.
In the Red River Valley, the floods have been increasing, and what they realized was because they had drained a lot of the marshes for for farmland, and now they're beginning to realize that this is going to get worse and worse and worse. And I'm just wondering if that's part of the discussions that are taking place. Global warming is causing more and more flooding. I mean, it's got to go somewhere. So
I don't have any idea about that. I do know that we are getting definitely more extreme events and more frequently. I mean, just watching what happened in Texas and that last hurricane that went up the East Coast just kind of hit everybody, it seemed like, from Florida all the way on up. They just seem to be more extreme. We've even had, 2014, we had 5 major snow sleet events in Louisiana. Georgia had a little bit of that too. I know, where's Andy out there, but I know Atlanta was part of one of those, but that's just unprecedented for South Louisiana.
Hi, going with that theme of lessons learned, I know the New York and New Jersey folks realized after the flooding they had to remediate a lot of the structure components that weren't normally exposed to water and soluble salts. So when you put in for your insurance losses, that's the smart thing to do. It's talking about step 10, I understand that, but it's still something that's going to come back to haunt you if you don't do a proper washing of those contaminants.
Right. Well, in this case, I mean, this is all fresh water, so it didn't have the saltwater issues like we do during a hurricane.
My question is this. Basically in Florida, and you probably remember some of the bridge losses that you endured, what we did is we did some bathymetric studies and we tried to determine criteria for which we would lose bridges due to hurricane events, storm surge and stuff like that. Mm-hmm. Has Louisiana, and what we did was we found out basically in those circumstances that you can't strengthen the bridges because they just can't be strengthened unless they're designed from the beginning to do that. Either it's going to pull the foundations out, or it's just going to, or if you attach it, or the superstructure is just going to get destroyed under a certain wave action. So we came up with what they called emergency response plans, which is primarily detour plans and plans to deal with bridge loss and everything else. I'm wondering if Louisiana, because you get this type of flooding, which seems to be so severe, and I don't know if you can do this, but have you looked into preparing emergency response plans to deal with these type of disasters in the future, which may identify resources and just, gives you a starting point to how to respond?
We do. Actually, each of those scour critical bridges, which there's, they could be that it's scour critical because they've scoured in the past and have a history of it, and/or there's unknown foundations. And every one of those bridges has an emergency plan. Now, the more critical ones, we have more elaborate plans, but that's one of the things that helped us on this event, these events, was we were pretty ready. It was just a matter of putting the plans into place and getting the proper personnel. So I appreciate you all listening.